Just a terrific all-around game for James. PJ Tucker's going to come back in, and Austin Rivers.
And someone in the Laker group is talking to Russell Westbrook and waving goodbye to him.
James Harden, of course, crazy streak this season. What do you think of what he's doing right now?
I think I'm not a fan of in terms of winning championships. I don't think that style is ever going to win championships. But at the same time, you have to keep your team's head above water to win games. So you have to do what you have to do to win games, and he's doing that, right? Now, I think...
So are you saying you don't think James Harden and the Rockets, as constructed, can win a title?
Not with this style of play, it won't win, right? With one player dominating the ball. Now, when you have Chris Paul come back and you have more movement to the offense, where you move guys around, where you're harder to find.
And Chris Paul's back, but you mean more in the...
Yeah, because listen, if you take one player, you put him at the top of the key, or you put him on the wing, and you're running screen rolls, you're always in front of the defense. The defense can key on that, particularly in the playoffs. And that's easy to defend. Yeah. It's easy to defend. Now, what he's doing is absolutely remarkable, though. And I think it's a testament to how remarkable it is, because people are now trying to minimize what it is that he's doing. I mean, he's doing some phenomenal stuff.
Last year, the Houston Rockets were able to go 53-29 underneath Mike D'Antoni, and they were able to make it to the playoffs, and they made it to the second round of the NBA playoffs and lost to the Golden State Warriors. And they responded by making a flurry of moves in the offseason. And herein lies the problem. So what's going on, guys? Before we get to the content, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and turn on my notifications. Also, we're going to be discussing this move on Twitch immediately after this video. The link to my Twitch is in the description down below. It's twitch.tv/FlightMike. And I'm also going to be giving away multiple copies of NBA 2K21 on Instagram. A link to the giveaways are in the description down below as well. Now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro. While I was watching the Houston Rockets face off against the Los Angeles Lakers, I couldn't help but wonder, okay, here we go again. Another season where Daryl Morey goes by the book, goes by stats, goes by analytics. And yet, here we are again with the same exact results, the same exact people slandering James Harden, and the same exact people pointing fingers at him, saying that there's no way you could build a championship roster around the man. But the thing that's so shocking to me is they got so close. They got extremely close. And I hate to keep bringing it up, but in Chris Paul's first season with the Houston Rockets, they were a game away from the NBA Finals. And had he not gotten injured, I think they could have beaten the Golden State Warriors that year. I actually do. But here lies the problem. The Houston Rockets got away from the thing that makes them so successful. You see, there is some truth to the fact that you cannot 100% build a championship team around James Harden. Meaning, I could take LeBron James, right? Put him on a team and maybe get him a supporting player that isn't on the top tier of star, and I could expect to make it deep into the NBA Finals. Of course, I'm not trying to hate on Anthony Davis. I think Anthony Davis is one of the greatest big men in NBA history. I'm more referring to players like Kevin Love, players like Chris Bosh. Of course, he did have help in the form of Dwayne Wade and Kyrie Irving. But what I'm trying to say is, in order for James Harden to be successful, you can't only have him isolating each and every single possession. And I could have told you this 2 years ago. I could have told you this 3 years ago. And originally, I was down to go by what Daryl Morey was doing. You see, in year one, after the Houston Rockets fired Kevin McHale in 2016 when they brought in Mike D'Antoni, we really saw the potential of James Harden. We really saw his inner playmaker come out. We saw more plays being made, and we saw more offensive movement. In year two, they figured, what if we got James Harden an additional piece? So Harden doesn't need to focus on running so many pick and rolls. He could focus strictly on isolation, whereas Chris Paul, who is a savant at running the pick and roll, could focus on the aspect of getting everyone else involved. And James Harden, if he really wanted to, he could, but for the most part, the burden of creating for his teammates and scoring didn't solely fall upon his shoulders. And that was a huge step forward, in my opinion. And I could keep going on and on about this because I talked about it at length and ad nauseum when we were discussing the Russell Westbrook problem. What ended up being the downfall to that team is they saw several of their 3-and-D players move on. They saw Trevor Ariza leave, Luke Richard Mbah a Moute nowhere to be found, and they just gave up on the concept of just needing to play good, sound defense. Well, you move on to year 3, which is Chris Paul's second year with the Houston Rockets, and things begin to slip underneath the cracks. People are beginning to understand the Houston Rockets' secret formula for success, and they're able to stop it. And on top of that, they're not that great at defense. You have James Harden, who's notorious for not being the greatest perimeter defender. He's a phenomenal post defender, and ironically, a really good interior defender. But during the regular season, when it comes to the perimeter, he's never been that amazing. And then on top of that, you have an older Chris Paul, who's still able to be fairly efficient on the defensive side of the ball, but except for those two, you do have Eric Gordon as well. But aside from them, the role players were definitely getting exploited on the defensive side of the ball. And as a result of this, you had James Harden and Chris Paul bickering at one another, which resulted in the trade for Russell Westbrook. And this is when I began to think, there's one guy here that just doesn't belong. More than just Westbrook, more than just James Harden, more than Mike D'Antoni. I think the odd man out here is Daryl Morey, and here's why. Originally, I thought there was a method to the man's madness, and a lot of the moves Daryl Morey was making was beginning to make a ton of sense. You see, James Harden needed an additional playmaker. He went out and got that additional playmaker. Mike D'Antoni needs shooters for his system. He got him exactly that. But this past year, from this past offseason until now, Daryl Morey, save for the China incident, which is a whole different topic that we don't even need to get to right now, has gotten away from the very thing that made the Rockets successful. Trading a player that was successful in pick and roll situations like Chris Paul for a player that literally succeeded in what James Harden did, only wasn't capable at scoring from three like James Harden and Russell Westbrook, was a huge step backwards, giving away additional capital to downgrade to Russell Westbrook. Even though Chris Paul has one of the worst contracts in the NBA, you now have a player that looks significantly more vulnerable in your system in Russell Westbrook that's getting paid significantly more. You have 2 Supermax contracts on your roster, but these Supermax contracts are only good enough to take you to the second round. And I'm not pointing the blame finger at Mike D'Antoni, because Mike D'Antoni originally was a coach that was notorious for his up-tempo style of play and shooting a ton of threes and running a lot of pick and rolls. What do you do when you make your offense go from only pick and rolls to mainly isolation plays and you take away the pick and roll in general? Mike D'Antoni's system isn't the same system that made him successful in the past. And the reason being because Daryl Morey is putting him in this corner where he has no choice but to run those plays. Russell Westbrook is fairly average to above average at running the pick and roll. I'm not saying that he's bad at it, but it's definitely not a Chris Paul at the point guard position. I don't want this to get too ranty. I just don't like seeing so many people slander James Harden. He does deserve some of the blame because, of course, he hasn't been so great in elimination games, but I don't think he's had the support he needed in those elimination games in order to really be successful. So at the end of the day, what do I think the Houston Rockets need to do? Well, if I was the general manager, if I was the the owner of the Houston Rockets, the first thing I'm doing is getting rid of Daryl Morey. I think his extremism with Moneyball has gotten too far. You know, taking away, completely abandoning the mid-range jumper was a cute little science experiment, but he didn't see his experiment out for himself. He got a little bit too antsy towards the end and got a little bit too impulsive with his Chris Paul trade because it didn't make any sense whatsoever. How could a general manager who prides himself on mainly shooting threes pay a premium to go from a player that is significantly more adept at shooting the three ball than to a player that is horrific at shooting the three ball just because it makes a cute little story because Russ and Harden get to reunite in Houston? I don't think so. So Daryl Morey must definitely go. But on top of that, I'm trying to find any takers whatsoever to take on Russell Westbrook's horrific contract. And I don't think this is going to be a contending team. I don't really know what team Russell Westbrook fits on. And I'm not saying Westbrook's a bad player by any means at all. I'm just saying he's a horrific fit next to James Harden. These are not two stars that deserve to be together. They don't want each other. They shouldn't be together. And what I'm going to do with that additional cap space is go and seek out some good 3-and-D players, some good two-way players to put aside James Harden, and maybe an above-average point guard that could occasionally take off some of the pressure from James Harden's shoulders. But I think Mike D'Antoni and James Harden are a good fit together. I do think they could potentially win a championship together, but the roster construction of this team just didn't make any sense this past year, and it's time for us to move on from Daryl Morey. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Is there anything else that you think I didn't see? Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike. I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.